We're back with part 2 of our interview with Skippyjon Jones author Judy Schachner. My name is Lauren Savage, owner of The Reading Bug, a children's bookstore in San Carlos, California, and we're talking about Judy's new book, Sarabella's Thinking Cap.
A favorite destination in your community. The Reading Bug, it's my favorite place to be.
My very first book was about Willie and May, about my great Aunt May and her little bird Willie who sat on her fuzzy gray head. And without her help, we would have had some rough times. So that was my first book, but I illustrated 3 books for Donna Jo Napoli. And Laura McGee Kwasniewski. I did her first picture book, which I think she should have illustrated because I think she's a wonderful illustrator. And I illustrated a book for Allison Jackson, I Know an Old Lady Who Swallowed a Pie. And wow, this was wonderful. I got to illustrate Lloyd Alexander's very last picture book before he died. And it was a folk tale called How the Cat Swallowed Thunder. So, but in between, I lied to an editor and said I could write, and then there you have it. So,
pretty sure you can write.
Well, if you can tell a good story.
Yes.
You don't know how to have to use the semicolon. Let me say that again. You do not know how. You do not have to know how to use a semicolon. But if you can tell a good story, and most kids can tell good stories. They go on and on and on. That's all you need. Imagination.
So every book starts with a notebook.
Every book I do begins with what I call a character Bible. I'm not a religious person, but I believe in this book. So character Bibles, my books are all character driven. So I usually have a character in mind, but I'm not a trained writer. I'm really professional 8-year-old, so I don't call myself a confident writer. So I'm very scared when an editor tells me, well, I've got to begin a new book. A white sheet of paper is the most frightening thing of all for a writer not for me, to just start writing down a story. So this way, I don't really know where the story is going to go. And these books are just free-form, intuitive collage. I'll spend time trying to sketch a character. I don't know how she's going to, I don't want to do a portrait of my daughter. This is a book about my daughter Sarabella and a little bit of me, especially our personalities. So I'm not looking to do a portrait. I'm just looking to create a character. I invited Frida Kahlo to paint on Sarabella's thinking cap here. But so I cut things out of magazines. I cut things out of newspapers. I might find a quote. What does that quote say? Can you read that?
What stories will you tell?
Yeah, I don't know where I got that from, but it's a good one. So I glued it in there. I love working on tracing paper, and I love, the layers.
And that one says best year yet underneath.
Best year yet, and maybe it will be. There's another interpretation of what Sarabella could look like. There is the real Sarabella. So I get things out of magazines. I paint on the paper. It's very freeing, and it's very comfortable and comforting. I could make these books forever. This probably came out of a National Geographic, and it's just it's huge, massive roots, and some young lady is climbing up the roots, which made me think of family roots. And I love to write words and vocabulary words, and I go on this way. I cut this elephant out of a National Geographic, and then I cut these bats out and I glued them on top of his head, because you never know when you're going to find 2 bouncing bats on the top of a, did I say bouncing dats?
I don't
2
know, but that was
bouncing
good.
bats on the top of an elephant's head. Bouncing bats.
But
See?
I mean, all the time, probably.
All the time. I found this bear wearing a backpack, and I put a little hat on his head, and I just keep looking at his fuzzy bear bum. And it's just, and this is a little bird that is like, he's tied to a little piece of wood, and there's a doctor listening to him with a stethoscope, but I think the head that I cut off is the Birdman of Alcatraz. And ironically, my hotel bedroom at night, last night,
That's right, yes.
I could lay in my bed and I could see Alcatraz, which when I was a child, I wanted to live there because I wanted to know the Birdman. So anyway, by the time I finished these books, my Sarabella used to make these jointed characters, hours and hours. She was an introvert. She spent hours in her room making really complex games and thesauruses, but yet she was very quiet in school, and probably had an unusual way of learning. Her teachers never understood, like, I don't think she's going to get this, or she might have to stay back at the end of the year. But I said, no, if you're patient, you'll figure out the way she thinks, because she thinks like I think. And there are always too many possibilities. And when you have too many choices, it's very difficult to settle on one answer. And sometimes when you can't settle on one answer, you can fail a test, which I did. So, many times.
Wow.
So this is what I do. I might find a beautiful bed in an interior design magazine, and I'll paint Sarabella in it.
I love that one. That's one of my favorites.
That's one of my favorites too.
Yeah.
And there was a rug in this room with these birds flying, and I thought, ooh, what if those birds were her nightmares that took roost in her mind, and they sat on her bed. And later on in this, I don't know where it is in this, I drew a picture of this. I thought was going to go in the book, but it didn't, because sometimes things don't. Yeah. So all because of that rug with the flying birds. This was originally a layout for a double-page spread where Sarah, her worries kept her awake at night, because sometimes introverts think too much. And but you can only put so much in a book, and if it doesn't move the story along, then. So anyway.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So how many revisions do you go through? I mean, or do you have so many more pages than actually make it into the book, or?
A few more pages, and to tell you the truth, after I go through this, I sit down with my editor and I talk the book to her. And then I make, I reduce the book down to like this size, so it's smaller than this book. And then I start drawing the pictures. I kind of see where I want it to go. And then I write everything out by hand on like mailing labels, and or double stick tape, and I stick on the text. And if I don't like the text, I remove it. If I get stuck on the words, then I move on with the pictures. So I am it's like parallel play. I'm doing two things at once, and it works well that way. I didn't go through very many changes in this book. I just drew it, wrote the story. Maybe I need to add a page here, maybe need to change that. Maybe I better not have a full-size Abraham Lincoln walking on his way to school with Sarah. That kind of thing. So, and I have a wonderful editor that doesn't pressure me, Lucia Monfried from Dial, Penguin. She just lets me go. Just leave her alone. And everybody at Penguin says, when is the book going to be done? I mean, I usually do a book a year, but I know I hand them in late. And I don't hand much in beforehand to anyone, and they're kind of like, what the hell? What the heck is she doing? Oh yeah, you can edit.
Yeah, we can edit.
And Lucia just says, leave her alone. This is the way she works. She does say I am the most organic person she's ever worked with, and I thought, might be a nice way of saying, you are so weird. I don't understand what you do.
But everybody works differently, right? And I think the best page,
does.
though, if you'll go to that bookmark page that we put in there, this is my favorite, and I think this is really important for kids to see. It says down here, Judith needs to work faster and finish her work every day.
That's actually a letter from my editor. But anyway, no, that's my report card that's my 5th grade teacher, but that was something that was in my report cards every year. And it's the beginning of a school year for most children across the country. And every year I had the hope that this year I was going to do well in school. The ironic thing about this is I really tried, but I had no interest in learning math. It just didn't interest me, and I wasted years trying to learn algebra. Instead, I just decided to read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in senior algebra class, and I failed geometry twice. I have more F's on my report cards. I honestly don't know how I graduated from high school. I never did well in grammatical tests. I wasn't a really good reader. I needed glasses. I didn't have any, so that kind of makes sense. But if you were to look at my report cards, all of them together, you would not think that person was going to go anywhere in life. The good thing is you're not the sum total of your grades. That's the important thing to remember. There are other important lessons to learn. For me, it was taking care of a sick mother, very sick mother. And so, but nobody at school knew that was going on. Nobody understood the pressure and the kind of the tough childhood I was going through, so you go into school, you have to conform, you have to make it through school, you have to pass tests, And if you're not good in things, then you fall behind. If you're not the cream of the crop, you feel bad about yourself. So all of those notes, after a certain point, they got to me. And it's like, but I was visiting a school in my mid-50s. So that was, I'm in my mid-60s now. So I was doing an auditorium visit, and a little third grade boy raised his hand, first question, and he said, Judy Schachner. He gave me 3 syllables in my last name, which I like.
Yes.
Schachner.
Schachner. Yes.
So he said, do you have ADHD? And I said, why do you ask, Mr. Man? And he said, because you're like me. You're crazy. And he liked it.
Yes.
And I thought, that was the 3rd time somebody said that to me or asked that question in like 2 weeks. So I went to a doctor. And I said I was diagnosed with having ADHD by a 3rd grade boy in Pennsylvania. And she was British. She looked a lot like the woman who was the game show host of You Are the Weakest Link. I used to make her say that to me every time I left the office. And I said, he said I had ADHD. And she said, I've never tested you. And I said, no, you have not. She tested me off the charts. Explained my whole life and why I could never finish anything. And so when I signed my first contract to finish a book, scared me to death because I thought,
because you don't finish anything.
I finished making 2 girls.
Yeah.
But that was kind of like an inner body experience.
It's nature.
It was nature. I really had nothing to do with it. But I mean, the great thing about school visits and talking to kids is that I can tell them, you don't have to be the best in your class to have a successful life. Because so much of what you learn, and also, I would bring home bad report cards all the time. And my parents always said to me, did you try your hardest? And I'd say, yeah. But they said, were you good? It's like, yeah, I was good. And that was the most important thing to them. You're a good person. That's the most important thing. When my children were growing up and I was a mom, it made me feel so comforted to know that I was not the best student. I wasn't in fancy clubs. We didn't have any money to take fancy lessons or anything. But what made me feel good is that if my kids struggled in a way or they weren't the best at something, doesn't mean they weren't going to be good in life. So it's not all about the report cards. There's more to learn than just read and write and arithmetic.
And thinking differently can create all of this and more.
Yeah,
I mean,
and thank goodness for, I was talking to kids. I found a quote the other, I forget when I found this, but genius is the stew. And I said to kids, what would we put, if we were to make a genius stew, what would we put in it? And so one kid said, we'd put Albert Einstein in it. It's like, yeah, I'd put Albert Einstein's socks in it, that would be delicious. So we were coming up with all these things that makes genius. And what does make a genius? I mean, Albert Einstein had an incredible imagination. And he wasn't I don't think he was very verbal for a long time. I don't think he spoke until he was 4 years old.
I think it was 4, right? Yeah.
Something like that. So, as I say, if you were to look at me on paper, you wouldn't put any money on me. But I just drew all the time.
Yeah.
And if you do something enough, if you do it every day, and you do it with a lot of love, then perhaps you will grow up to be the thing or do the thing that you love. And most frequently, kids who find something early, they, Emma, my oldest daughter, picked up a dead fish in a pond when she was 2, and she was fascinated by it and rubbed its little eyeballs, showed it to 2 old women on the beach, which scared them. And I thought, there's a future there. She's a paleontologist.
Yep.
It made sense.
Never know.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. And again, the new book is Sarabella's Thinking Cap, and you can purchase that at thereadingbug.com and many other great independent bookstores across the country. Judy Schachner, thank you so much.
Thank you. You're a wonderful interviewer. Wonderful story.
Your family store for books and more, it's filled with harmony. The reading bug, it's the happiest place to be.